Being a single dad isn't easy, but it's the one thing that's kept me grounded. After my wife left 3 years ago, I learned to build life around my daughter and work. Every morning starts with packing lunches, rushing to daycare, and clocking in at the office before most people have even had breakfast. I don't complain anymore. Routine is safer than disappointment. At work, I've always kept my head down. My boss, Clara, is the kind of woman people notice the second she walks into a room, elegant, confident, with that calm authority that makes others straighten their backs. She's in her early 40s, married, successful, and the type who never lets her emotions slip. But behind the polished exterior, there's something heavy in her eyes, something tired. I've caught it a few times when she thinks no one's watching. We don't talk much beyond work. Still, she's always treated me fairly, never like just another employee. A few months ago, she called me into her office after a long day and thanked me for staying late to finish a report. It wasn't just polite, it felt sincere, like she really saw me. For someone who's spent years being invisible, that moment stuck. I never let myself think about her that way, though. She's my boss. She's married. I've already lived through betrayal once, and I promise myself never to be part of someone else's story like that. But there's something about the way she sometimes looks lost, or the way her smile fades the second she turns away, that hits closer than it should. I tell myself it's just empathy. Still, when she asks me to stay late to help with projects, I don't say no. Maybe it's duty. Maybe it's something I don't want to name. The night everything changed started with a company dinner. Clara had been tense all week, her usual calm replaced with a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. I could tell she was trying too hard to appear fine. By the time the speeches were over, her glass of wine had turned into 3. When the party began to thin out, she was laughing too loudly, her words slightly slurred. No one else seemed to notice, or maybe they didn't care. I did. When she stood to leave, I offered to drive her home. She brushed me off, saying she'd call a car, but her phone slipped from her hand before she could even unlock it. I caught it midair and told her it wasn't up for debate. She looked at me for a long second, almost defiant, then sighed and handed me her keys. The ride was quiet at first. Then she started talking about how her husband didn't ask where she was anymore, how they hadn't shared a real conversation in months. Her voice cracked once, and it caught me off guard. I didn't know what to say, so I just listened. When we reached her place, she stumbled on the steps. I helped her inside. She turned toward me, eyes glassy, whispering that I was too good, that someone like me shouldn't be alone. Her hand brushed my arm, and for a moment I froze. I could have leaned in. Instead, I gently moved her hand away and told her she needed rest. She looked hurt, then embarrassed, and turned away. I waited until she was settled before leaving quietly. Sitting in my car afterward, I felt my pulse racing, guilt and relief twisting together. Nothing had happened, but it felt like something almost did, and that was enough to shake me. The next morning, she avoided looking at me. Her usual calm tone was replaced with clipped professionalism. By lunch, she finally came to my desk and asked to talk. Behind closed doors, she apologized, said she remembered enough to know she'd embarrassed herself. I told her she hadn't, that nothing happened, and I meant it. But the silence after that was heavy, filled with words neither of us wanted to say. She thanked me for taking care of her and promised it wouldn't happen again. I nodded, but something between us had already shifted. In the following days, our conversations changed. They weren't just about deadlines anymore. She started asking about my daughter, about how I managed everything alone. I told her it wasn't easy, but I tried. She smiled softly and said she admired that. I caught myself watching her more than I should, noticing the exhaustion she tried to hide, the way she seemed relieved when she laughed. One evening, she stayed back after everyone left, and we ended up talking for hours about things that had nothing to do with work, childhood, regrets, the kind of love that fades too quietly to notice. I started to dread weekends, knowing I wouldn't see her. It felt wrong, but also real, like we'd found a version of honesty the world wouldn't accept. She began to confide in me about her marriage, how they shared a house, but not a life. I listened, torn between wanting to help and wanting to forget. When she came by my home one afternoon to drop off some documents, my daughter offered her cookies, and Clara smiled like she hadn't in years. When she left, she paused at the door and said quietly, "You make me feel safe." I didn't answer, but those words stayed with me longer than they should have. A week later, she called late at night. Her voice was trembling, broken in a way I'd never heard before. She said her husband had accused her of cheating, that he'd found messages she'd written but never sent, drafts filled with thoughts about me. She sounded ashamed, scared, and exhausted. I told her to come over so she wouldn't be alone. When she arrived, she didn't speak at first. She just stood there, shaking, eyes red from crying. I reached out to comfort her, and she collapsed into my arms. The moment felt both wrong and inevitable. When she looked up, our faces were close enough that neither of us could pretend anymore. The kiss wasn't planned, it just happened. It wasn't wild or careless, it was desperate, full of everything we hadn't said. For a few seconds, the world stopped existing. Then she pulled away, realizing what we'd done, and the silence that followed felt heavier than any guilt I'd known. She whispered that she couldn't do this, that she'd already lost herself once and wouldn't again. Before I could say anything, she was gone. The next morning, her resignation email came through. A short note, polite but final. Later that day, I found an envelope on my desk with her handwriting. Inside was a note that said, "You reminded me what kindness feels like. But I have to fix what's left of my life." I read it twice before putting it away. Weeks passed, and work went back to normal, at least from the outside. I still think about her sometimes, not with longing, but with a quiet ache. She didn't destroy my life. She just reminded me how fragile decency can be. I didn't lose my job, but I lost a part of myself that once knew exactly where the line was.